So a lot has happened since our class on Wednesday. As you all know, we're going to a virtual classroom. Before I move into this lecture, I just want to say I'm going to try to figure all of our online coursework stuff um, by early next week and post an announcement by Wednesday or Thursday. I'll be honest, I am moving on Monday, so um, it'll probably be Wednesday or Thursday when I let you guys know. But we'll figure it all out and get it settled. I wanted to go keep this thing relatively short so you're not wasting your time over spring break dealing with source citations. But so let's go ahead and get into this. After you watch this video, you should stay tuned or go to Canvas again and find the quiz just to make sure that you are up to date with this. It's not going to be, fill out a citation. It's just going to be overall about the reading and about this short lecture. So on Wednesday, or last class rather, we talked about um, lists, but we talked earlier this week about arcs of coherence, and I just want to mention again, when we deal with this, we're talking about the way that our audience is going to understand us, our auditor is going to interpret our information, and the best way to make sure that that information is clear and easily accessible. In other words, the best way to make sure that the auditor can use this information, that we empower them, is to conform to these different rhetorical constraints, to have grammar that matches their needs, to have formal grammar versus informal grammar to match what they're expecting, to have a genre and match up with the genre demands. Um, this makes it easier for your auditor to organize the information as they read it in their head, and therefore interpret new information as you go forward with the report. And once the report is done, use that information to make decisions or whatever else. We talked before about these cohesive connectors and this different ways that we connect the ideas between sentences, within sentences, and that sort of stuff. I will urge you once again to pay attention to Pinker and let me know if you have any significant or not significant specific questions about any of these categories of connectors. We've talked about organizational control a lot. We've talked about syntactic control quite a bit. We touched a little bit on lexical control um, and the need to make sure that you find a shared vocabulary or shared language with the auditors. Um, Make sure when you're thinking about your collaborative report that you are working together with your team to develop a shared language, and then make sure that that language is appropriate to your audience. So for instance, if you're all engineers but you're talking to a librarian or someone in IT, then that means you got to adjust how you talk about something. All right, so just remember, all this idea of control is to make sure that your material is precise, concise, and clear, so that, to go back to this idea of technical style, so that the auditor can use the information. So lists we talked about before, make sure that you're privileging concision and precision and justify the exigence according to your auditor, not according to you. Follow these tips. If you don't remember this from last class, pay special attention, especially to this idea of the lead-in sentence and to the need for consistency. So that's where this punctuate the list consistently and present items in parallel clauses. This idea of consistency leads back with this idea of precision and concision. If it's consistent, then it's more precise and more concise. It's also easier in terms of clarity, easier to compare items in a list. There are three types of lists. I touched on this. Don't be afraid of paragraph long lists. These are usually 2 to 3 sentences each, and typically they're bullet points instead of longer. You see this all the time with slideshows online these days, and you can think about that as a paragraph list with the captions that they include with those types of lists. So what are we here for? We're here to talk about citation styles and specifically style sheets, professional style sheets. So when you document your research, I will hit on this again as we get closer to the final technical report, but I wanted to start now to get it in your head what genre is of a citation, of an in citation is what we're going to focus on today. There are different needs for different style sheets for in-text citations or parenthetical citations, as you might hear them called. But the whole point of this is that when you're thinking about the types of sources that you're using, you're trying to corroborate your individual findings and your assumptions. Especially newer writers need to make sure that they have professionals or people with more experience backing up the conclusions that they make. And it's nothing against your training or anything else. It just specifically, or it's just the nature of being a young writer whose name is not as well known. And so when you're trying to develop a report, you need to make sure to build credibility through identifying affiliated research or corroborating evidence. So people that agree with you in theory, not in like everything that you say. So we talked about this before a couple weeks ago. What is a style sheet? Style sheet is a standardized design, okay, for a corporate body, for a group of people. It's rhetorically aware and visually appealing. Okay, you might think, what we're talking about citations. In citations, these are not rhetorically or visually appealing at all, but they are because they fit a format that makes it easy to find information. And this idea of a style sheet is a branding statement. That's not necessarily true, except I'll talk about how the ethos and credibility is built by the type of style sheet that you choose to follow. So we talked before, MLA is a style sheet, APA is a style sheet. And in general, these large professional organizations have set style sheets. So you have the American Psychological Association, the APA, you have Modern Language Association, MLA. They set standards for how you should cite things so that your people that are working within those associations know how to find sources when looking at each other's work and build off of that sort of stuff. The AP is another association. They have a less formalized citation because it's journalism, but um, they do have a set style sheet, and it's to set this standard across the corporate body, across all people that are in APA or all people that are in MLA or all people that are in whatever else. And in technical genres, we still have these other style sheets that you may not be aware of because they're very similar to others, or you may not be aware of because you're not yet enmeshed in those associations. But they're also these IEE, ASME, AMA. These tend to be copycat style sheets that have slight differentiation. But once you get into that field, you want to familiarize yourself with it. And if there is, like with IEE, a set style sheet, but nobody uses it, then you don't have to learn it. So for instance, we just talked about it. MLA, I've talked about it in class before. Nobody uses MLA. It's a standard, it's easy to teach, so college and high school teachers like to start with it, but nobody in the field actually uses that as a standard style sheet. So in general, when you're talking about style sheets, you have all these different things, clear delineation of font size, and this is true of all these different professional ones, definition of key terms, plain and common abbreviations. Okay, so for instance, in Shakespeare studies, there's a set abbreviation for each of the plays in case you're aware of it, and MLA signs off on it. And then all these other things that are common. You know, the larger the organization, the less likely you're going to talk about color palette, but you are going to talk about source citations the larger it is because you have a whole bunch of people interacting. And that's why when it comes to these professional associations, you have source citation and links. These types of things are decided on so that people can work together, right, and work with each other's research. So questions to ask when deciding on which citation style to adopt. This has everything to do with the rhetorical situation. What are the conventions or norms of the field? That's context. And what are the expectations of the primary auditor? That's who you're talking to. And once you have the rhetor and the auditor and the content, you have a rhetorical triangle. So, it all comes back to this, and I know I keep repeating myself, but that's the nature of this kind of writing. And so you need to think about what are the expectations of the primary auditor? Who are you talking to, and what would they expect? Because this is a genre or a style that is trying to help people find sources that agree with you and help them find it so they can get more information if they're interested, and see that their conclusions support your own. So I'm going to focus on these three because this is what Markel focuses on: MLA, IEE, and APA. I'm well aware that IEE is not very common anymore, and that it's a very narrow field in terms of electrical engineering, and that it's not a huge program here at UK. But take it as you will. Change it to ASME or whatever. So MLA is common among humanities. IEE is common among electrical engineering. It's also a format that's copied by some of the other professional associations. And APA is common in the social sciences. And this typically includes the health sciences as well. And a lot of the hard sciences, biology, chemistry, and that sort of stuff, use APA. And I'll talk about why in a second. We're going to focus a lot on APA today. One thing that they all share in common is this focus in the way that the endnotes are designed on source location. And why is that? Because you're trying to help someone find this research. A lot of people talk about this in terms of plagiarism, but that's not why these style sheets were developed. They're developed to help people work together, find sources that they share in common, and build a greater network of interconnected ideas. So, in other words, to build knowledge, that idea of epistemology in terms of, or not epistemology, or epistemic rhetoric in terms of methodological rhetoric, one idea builds off another, or in terms of ontological or sociological rhetoric, where the conversation gets you closer to the truth. You want to help people find the sources that you're building off of so they can see if they agree with you and that the sources they find the same trustworthy sources, or they can follow the conversation further. All of these also have an emphasis on rhetoric credibility. And by that I mean the way that these things are designed is to help enhance the credibility of the rhetoric. The citations, the end citations, tend to focus on this idea of how do I help the rhetoric enhance his or her credibility. And that's what the in-text citations are designed to do. But like I said, we're not going to focus on that too much today. So what I would encourage you guys to do is to take a minute, pause this recording, and answer these questions for yourselves, just so you have a sense of what's going on. Which style sheets do you understand the best? Why? Which style sheet is preferred by your intended profession? This is a key one, and one you should look into sooner rather than later. And then, why do you think your profession uses this standard? Okay. So take a moment and come back. So we've talked about some of the things that they have in common, but you also have some differences, and that's what we start talking about. So MLA, there's a focus on auditor usability, and IEE does the same thing. So the way that they design their citations is what they focus on usability. The MLA, the way that the citations are laid out is common to publishing, and so it makes it easier to find in library databases and that sort of things if you just follow from one part of the citation to the next, author to title, and then on to publication and year. IEE has a different approach to auditor usability in that it lists sources in the order in which they were cited, and so it helps with, if you keep track of where you are in the text, following along. IEE and APA favor recency. That's why APA uses years, preferences years in its citation styles. IEE does the same thing. MLA and IEE both focus on rhetoric identification. MLA because it's the humanities and you want to know who's saying what because it can come from any time period. IEE, it's a smaller community, so knowing who you're citing is easier to get at. APA, you got a large community of psychiatrists and social scientists, and so it's harder to focus in on that. But you also have a lot more team written papers, and so identifying one Redor is harder to do. But APA and MLA are a little bit easier because of the way they structure their end notes, their reference sections, or works cited sections alphabetically. That makes it easier to just go to the end and find all the sources, and that helps with further research. And then MLA and APA are much more academically oriented. It has a lot to do with that research idea, but it also has to do with how they talk about, you know, common sources or non-academic sources. So here's a general format, and you can see this at work. So you have last name, first name, title of the article, source information, publication information, page numbers. Now I've broken this down into the most general way to look at it possible so that you can account for the variation among like web sources versus print sources versus multimodal sources and that sort of stuff. So you can see, source of the information, if it's a longer piece, then you tend to have it italicized. A shorter piece is put into quotation marks. Well, most shorter pieces are inside longer pieces. So a chapter in a book, a song in an album, or that sort of stuff, a episode of a TV show. So you can find this sort of stuff, and then you got to get into publication information. With recording artists, it's like who was the engineer and that sort of stuff. With a book, it's where was it published. And you have the similar thing here. Now, publication information in MLA includes year of publication, but because of the focus on recency, APA uses year of publication up here. Another thing to note is that the use of punctuation, periods, and that sort of stuff are used to indicate the end of a major section of information, much like they would a sentence, and commas are used in between. Okay, so you can see how that works. Okay, there are some differences in like whether or not you put medium. Okay, MLA used to ask for medium in terms of location as well, and the way they treat hyper or URLs. MLA tends to just count on you to figure it out, but APA tends to ask for it, and you put it at the end. I think that's mainly because APA is outdated, but that's my own opinion. So if we look at this in terms of a rhetorical situation, you have last name, that's the rhetor, obviously. Year of publication, exigence. Okay, so why were they writing it? That's why recency is so important in APA, because it's just about when was it written and what else has been discovered since then. It's a scientific study, so that's why they tend to use it. Content, obviously, this is the meat of the genre or of the citation. This is where I can find the information. If I just know the name of the author and the year of publication, it's not going to get me much, but this will. And then location of the publisher, and that's context. So if we think about this from the auditor's point of view, this genre is trying to first tell you who wrote it, okay, and then when they wrote it or why they wrote it, the exigence, and then what exactly is it about, and then how do I understand where it sits with other things? So where was it published? How credible is that publication? That sort of stuff. Now, as a citation, this follows the similar breakdown of what you would have with an essay. You have your introduction, where you're trying to get a sense of why this was written and who wrote it. And then you have the body, which is all about like, okay, what was in there? So the discussion section, the results, the methodology, that sort of stuff. And then you don't typically have the context section, but that's, you get it. So you can see how this works in terms of, the differences between them when you write it out. So this is chapter 6 from Pinker. As you can see, telling right from wrong, sense of style, that's the place. Well, here I get a sense of who's writing it, and then where they're publishing it. APA, I get a sense of who wrote it, when, okay, and then where I can find it, okay. Now, one thing I'll note that I didn't really talk about much with APA is that because of the focus on recency and because of the large teams, like groups of, you know, two to 2 to 15, 2 to 20, 2 to 30 people that might write an APA cited paper, um, you tend to limit it to initials instead of just the full name. But MLA's reverence rather for the author, for the reader, is why you would give the full name here. There's also the long arc of history that MLA tends to call in that it's used in the humanities, so history, English, art history, that sort of stuff. Whereas here, if it's older than 30 years, then you're not typically citing it, or it's very easy to tell who you're citing because it's someone that's super well known. So, anyways, that's getting into the minutia of this all. If you have questions about APA or MLA or IEE or any of the citation styles that you might use, please let me know. For the sake of this class, I would rather that you use something that is auditor focused. Okay, so to go back to this, something that's focused on the auditor and something that's consistent with the norms in your field. Okay, because even if your auditor is not an academic, they still will want to find this information. So you want to present it in a way that they are likely to look for this information if they were to Google it or something like that. So other things to consider when talking about citation style is the document evergreen? Okay, in other words, will it last forever, or is it content? Is it time sensitive? Most of you are going to be working with stuff that's time sensitive. That's why APA is preferred in most of your fields. MLA tends to look at all articles as evergreen, so that's why there's that focus on that. All right. Is the document contributing to a research agenda or academic conversation? Okay, then maybe you should use one of these professional organization style sheets. But if it's not, then you can be a little less formal about it. So that's just something to consider. And less formal doesn't mean no citations. Less formal just means, maybe not as rigorously documented. And then let's just be honest here. Do you have time to learn a new style sheet or to edit your citations down? I mentioned a couple of times already, I just recently had to edit citations, and it is a beast. So it's easier to start from scratch instead of trying to flip it afterwards, change the citations afterwards. And honestly, you should start learning the norms of your field. So that's why I encourage you to do that. But if you got a whole bunch of other stuff going on, I'll understand. I don't, however, want to see any MLA citations. That is never going to be appropriate for anybody in technical writing, even those people that are coming out of humanities, like people that are in the Word department or whatever else. That's not what we use. So if you want to lean on APA or try to learn a new engineering focused or AMA focused style sheet, you're welcome to do that. But obviously, you guys have different things going on. So just to reiterate before I close out, MLA is used by the humanities. It focuses on author usability and reader identification. It is academically oriented and focused on academic contribution, but the way humanities discussions and arguments go and knowledge is built in the humanities, recency is not as important as who said what. And so that's why MLA is the way it is. APA relies instead on recency and academic contribution. It doesn't care as much about who the reader is. And so as a result of that, it tends to preference the year publication. So I'm just going to go back real quick so you can see this. This would be your basic format, and the specifics of it you can find a lot of useful tutorials if you're going to get into this on Purdue OWL. If you don't know that site, you might want to get familiar with it and other things like that. The other thing I will say is if you're using a citation machine, so a program that puts together your citations for you, you still want to know what it should look like. Citation machines require metadata to be entered correctly on the website that you are using to generate that citation. And a lot of times it isn't. So if you ever see NA in a citation, that's because the metadata wasn't there and the machine wasn't able to put it together. That looks really bad if you have those kind of citations in your documents. It shows a lack of um, precision and a lack of clarity, and just a quick, like that's just something to watch out for. And I will be watching for it in your documents. So make sure that if you're going to use EndNote or whatever else, that you double check afterwards. Use it to start, and then double check and make sure that it's correct. All right. Have a good break, or I hope you had a good break if you're watching this later. Make sure to do parsing that citation that is due on the Monday after spring break, as I switched it up to follow this lecture. But take care and look for an announcement regarding our virtual classes. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.